Of course, I don't think that a lot of people saw all the really biting wit of Gilbert in those days. I think people were a bit more mild, you know. But Gilbert, of course, wasn't mild, and of course he was always trying to expose people like the Major General and Sir Joseph Porter, who were good at everything except their job. And that's, of course, what we call very relevant today.
When I was a choral scholar at Cambridge, my director of music, the celebrated composer John Rutter, told me that he thought with the Gondoliers, Sullivan began to become a little decadent, and I've always remembered that. Well, here, many, many years later, we are at a Cambridge May ball, about as decadent a symbol as you can find, and the University Gilbert and Sullivan Society are performing the Gondoliers. How will it go down? Will they be able to be heard over the rock bands?
Unexpectedly.
No, but it's a good thing, isn't it, to have it at the May ball, I think.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
We're in England. We should do English May ball.
Well, the Gondoliers is set in Italy and imaginary Barataria, but she wasn't fooled, any more than Jonathan Miller wasn't having any Japanese nonsense in his Mikado. But whether or not the Gondoliers is a satire on the British monarchy, and even though the temporarily enthroned working-class boys turn a monarchy into a republic, Queen Victoria commanded a performance of the Gondoliers at Windsor Castle. Gilbert still remained unknighted, mind you, and it was rumoured that his name was to be excluded from the Windsor Castle programme. Command performances at Windsor Castle continued right up until the demise of the old D'Oyly Carte.
We did a performance of HMS Pinafore. After the performance, which went down quite well, we had to remain on the stage to be presented, and all the royals came up, and I think Princess Margaret had had possibly a little too much to drink, and she came up to John Ellison, who'd been playing the bosun, and she started singing his number, "For he is the Englishman." And there was this awkward pause, and, you know, we sort of looking at our feet, not wanting to laugh. And it's the Queen Mother said to Charles, "Can you go and deal with Auntie Margaret, dear?" And he took her away and they weren't seen again. Yes. Sunlight flooded back into the Savoy with the Gondoliers. Although Yeoman had undoubtedly been an artistic success, it had disappointed at the box office, and Gilbert braced himself now to find a subject that Sullivan would be prepared to set. But as Sullivan was planning an actual grand opera dedicated to Queen Victoria for D'Oyly Carte's new English opera house, he was perfectly happy to go to Venice, steep himself in a bit of good old Gilbertian topsy-turvy, and compose the Gondoliers with even more miraculous speed than usual. But would D'Oyly Carte have to manage without the three stars who had been with the company since The Sorcerer? Rutland Barrington had left the company before Yeoman, George Grossmith had left during the run to resume his solo career, and now Richard Temple went. After a disastrous spell in management, Barrington was happy to be lured back to play Giuseppe, and though Marco, the tenor half of the double act, gets the famous aria, "Take a pair of sparkling eyes, hidden ever and anon in a merciful eclipse. Do not heed the mild surprise, having passed the Rubicon, take a pair of rosy lips." Of the two, it's the baritone Giuseppe who holds the dramatic reins and has the most virtuoso patter song, though Queen Victoria's only comment on him was that he was very fat. The Duke of Plaza Toro, without Grossmith to play him, is not a central role. In fact, there is no centre.
Without stars, Gilbert intentionally spreads the responsibility among a much larger cast than usual and divides it into two camps that only collide towards the end. If the comedy is perhaps a little less sharp, the opera does have tremendous exuberance.
The first scene is exhilaratingly through-composed.
We called Gondolieri, but that's a vagary. It's quite honorary, the trade that we ply. For gallantry noted, since we were short-coated, to beauty devoted, Giacomo and I.
And not a word is spoken for 20 minutes. The most passionate love music is given to two subsidiary characters.
When alone together, two loving hearts and those that bear them may join in temporary tether, though fate apart should rudely tear them.
Who sing two ravishing duets.
Oh, Betty, Betty, let the grave close o'er the days that were, that never will be more. Oh, Betty, Betty, love away home, and let the whirlwind mourn its
And then they disappear until well into the second act. But it's Louis, the drummer boy, rather than either gondolier, who turns out to be the king who was abducted at birth and already married to his secret love. Was this perhaps a childhood fantasy of Gilbert's, who'd been kidnapped in Naples as a baby?
In the gondoliers, there's more dance than ever before.
During the run of gondoliers, Carte expected Gilbert and Sullivan to pay for a new front-of-house carpet at the Savoy. Carte said it was a production expense, and Gilbert, I think understandably, disagreed. Carte was making his fortune out of them. Surely the upkeep of the theatre was his responsibility. Sullivan sided with Carte, but then the fact that Carte was opening his new opera house with Sullivan's Ivanhoe may have been a diplomatic consideration. For Gilbert, who had been asked to write the libretto for Ivanhoe, the carpet was the straw that broke the camel's back, and he washed his hands of them both.
There would be no more Savoy operas, and Carte now forfeited his right to produce any revivals at the Savoy. This would have been a huge blow to Carte. The gondoliers made more money than any of the others. Gilbert and Sullivan were at the height of their popularity. When Gilbert went to Venice, he was serenaded by real gondoliers. 20,000 vocal scores of the gondoliers had been sold on the day of publication alone, and another 70,000 by the end of the week. Luckily for Carte, Gilbert relented.
And his sensitive palate, as dry as a crust, is a tenor can't do himself justice. Now observe.
Gilbert and Sullivan did collaborate again, twice, on Utopia Limited and The Grand Duke.
It's no use, I can't do myself justice.
And though there are things to enjoy in both, all but the staunchest fans admit that the spark had gone and that neither Gilbert nor Sullivan really does himself justice. Utopia Limited satirises royalty, government, business, the press, tenors, and specifically Englishness itself. And there are marvellous moments.
Sweet and low, sweet and low, sweet and low, and all enduring are the songs that lovers sing, are the songs that lovers sing. Sweet
But though the anorak in me would like to be in both, neither opera really catches fire. George Grossmith clearly read the writing on the wall and declined to be in either. Well, both operas have their champions, most of whom are likely to subscribe to SavoyNet.
Sam, Angela, from the end of your speech after the song right prior to your entrance, please. Thank you.
As the princess comes of age at 2 tomorrow.
SavoyNet, well, about 700 complete idiots from around the world, mostly in the UK and America, but also a large number in Australia and various other countries. The thing they have in common is that they all discuss Gilbert and Sullivan online.
We ought to be very happy. If I'm not, it'll be my first bad investment. I often picture us in the long, cold, dark December evenings, sitting close to each other.
That's really, really nice. I feel like you guys you sound and act like you've been rehearsing this for weeks instead of minutes.
Just not together.
Because so many of us go to Buxton every year for the International Gilbert and Sullivan Festival, we thought it'd be quite fun to put on a show.
It's for a long run, mind. A run that may last many, many years. No understudy. And once embarked upon, there is no throwing it up.
Ah, we are used to these long runs in England. They are the curse of the stage.
Take my advice when deep in debt.
Amateurs everywhere give the Grand Duke the benefit of the doubt in a way that commercial management simply couldn't risk. The Cambridge University G&S Society have chosen it for their Freshers' show. 4 years after the Grand Duke, in 1900, Sullivan died, aged only 58. Gilbert, finally knighted, died trying to rescue a girl swimming in his lake at Grimsdyke in 1911. D'Oyly Carte's widow left the Savoy in 1909, and as early as that there was a feeling that the operas had had their day and were unlikely to be revived again, so today's prophets of doom might like to bear that in mind. But after the First World War, D'Oyly Carte's son, Rupert, took the reins and started repertoire seasons, and supervised complete recordings of many of the operas. He was still running the company when Thomas Round auditioned in 1945.
I was shown through to where Mr. Carte was waiting for me in the dressing room, and he said yes, he'd enjoyed that. He said, but Mr. Round, very diplomatic. I do like the artists in my company to speak the dialogue with a neutral accent, but I'm sure that you would be able to master that, wouldn't you? And I think I put a bit on and said, right, Mr. Carte, I'll do my best. But, so that's what happened. And I put my notice into the police force and joined them at in February 1946.
Rupert's daughter, Bridget, succeeded him, and so, for the best part of the century, D'Oyly Carte toured most of the Savoy operas for most of each year, in productions that they believed were faithful to Gilbert's originals.
I had 8 weeks to learn 8 roles, and from scratch with dialogue and everything, which I did. And I was taught these roles by Snooky Fancourt. I don't know what her real name was, but I know she was the wife of Darrell Fancourt. Of course, was way before my time. But she was a charming lady, and she tried to school me in other ways as well, because she said, you realise that you're a representative of the company, and as such, you must uphold the traditions of the D'Oyly Carte, and you must not let the company down when you go on train calls. I said, oh dear, well, what do I have to do not to let them down? She says, well, you have to dress better than that.
The whole D'Oyly Carte modus operandi was charmingly, eccentrically old-fashioned. And for some of the fans, the company represented not just the operas, but a whole vanishing way of life. A way of life Gilbert had satirised, but which these fans now saw through the rose-tinted spectacles of nostalgia. The copyright expired, and the income that went with it, and the company eventually woke up in a world where production values made unsubsidised opera almost impossibly expensive. The academic Ian Bradley reports a touching, very revealing story about the new gondoliers in the 1960s, which had comedy business with practical spaghetti. In order to avoid the complication of preparing or buying it in, Dame Bridget suggested that they use knitting wool instead.
Now, I think tradition is all very well if it's a live tradition, if it's in aspic, it will just jellify and die. And I think that's what happened, that audiences were, new young audiences were coming, but the shows sort of stayed there and became fusty, I think, and weren't reinvented in an interesting way.
The writing was on the wall. The Arts Council averted its gaze, and the old company folded in 1982.
The new D'Oyly Carte restricted itself to a handful of the most popular titles.
The thing that really cheered me up was in the audience, people would come out saying, but of course they've modernised the language, haven't they? And I hadn't, of course. What I was doing is truthfully doing the jokes.
I was one of the founder members of the new company.
I always thought it strange that the new D'Oyly Carte company never sought to create a repertoire.
No.
They would do one-off productions, jettison them, then do something else.
Yes, which I think was silly, because in the short time that company ran, which was 15 years, I think there were 3 yeomen of the guard with different costumes and set. There were 2 Iolanthes, there were 3 pirates, and I think 3 Mikados. I mean, even Covent Garden wouldn't have...
you wonder if that really was the most effective way of...
In a world without D'Oyly Carte, GNS still thrives. There are touring companies, opera houses produce them, and though those theatres are a great deal bigger than Gilbert would have liked, I've played Coco in the 5,000-seater Fox Theatre in Atlanta, for instance, where a large audience appeared to be having a very good time, and The Patient's Prom played to an even larger audience. There are also inventive productions in tiny fringe theatres.
The marvellous thing is that Charles Court Opera, John Swornin has got this operatic society together. The ages are around about 20, so it's all going on, so I can die happy.
There's even an all-male GNS company.
And all these companies have devoted followings.
Gilbert and Sullivan have friends in high places.
I think it's such a shame that there's now become this huge divide between classical music and popular music. And in those days, people used to go to GNS. When it was written, it was a great excitement. The next Gilbert and Sullivan opera coming out, as with the next Offenbach operetta coming out, it was a popular thing. But the music is very good. And Offenbach's music is very good and very hard to do well.
My hunch is that they feel best when they're at least done, as far as music and text is concerned, more or less as they were written. Then they could be rediscovered, because I do think there's a generation now that doesn't know about the Vicar's Tea Party misapprehension of them.
I don't know why people are so snooty about operetta. It's really, really hard to do well, I think. Because you have to act, you have to speak, you have to have good timing, and that doesn't necessarily go with being an opera singer. And it's jolly hard to learn it. I don't know whether you can, really. So I think I was very pleased to have had the chance of doing it. I think I must have been deadly awful when I was, that young, because I was terribly shy and awkward, and probably thought I was marvellous. But as you get older, you realise you're not that great, really. It's terrible. Wonderful growing up.
Managements have picked up the Arts Council obsession with finding a new, young audience, but they must be careful not to alienate the existing, loyal audience. As early as the 1870s, Henry James was saying that the theatre was awash with grey hair, and if it still is, and theatre has survived, perhaps theatre-going is something that people grow into. Sheila Hills hated Gilbert and Sullivan as a child, but suddenly discovered its joys in her 60s.
They're my lifeline, really, to happiness and well-being and feeling good. You always come out of a performance smiling and feeling happy and laughing over the old jokes that you always laugh at. They're just, laughter's the best medicine, They're very good for me.
The new audience will find its way there naturally with the passing of time. But as it happens, in the case of Gilbert and Sullivan, their young devotees are already there, both in the auditorium and on stage.
I'm 18 and I've come to the festival since I was 14, and when I was 14 I basically saved up all my pocket money for this holiday, and I was so excited about it. I'd been given the opportunity to perform at this festival, and ever since I've pretty much saved up my money, and it's a working holiday. I'm hopefully going off to university after this and to open up my own opera company if possible and carry on G&S as it should be performed.
Uniquely, for Gilbert and Sullivan, devotees are both in the audience and performing, sometimes simultaneously.
So all the sisters, cousins and aunts all join, everyone together, echoing, for he's the captain of the Pinafore. That's not bad. It's not good, but it's not bad. Now, the thing is about Gilbert and Sullivan, it goes rather fast. All I heard was, yeah, just soft plates up. It's just a bit tricky, but you've got the idea nicely.
It was absolutely fantastic, a really enjoyable evening, and it was a piece I didn't know, so we learnt it tonight, sang along, and absolutely fantastic. Really great fun.
Perhaps because Gilbert and Sullivan were such a motley pair, such an unlikely partnership, the spark that ignited when they put on the motley and collaborated made the Savoy Operas even greater than the sum of their parts. And they continue to mean much more than just a night at the theatre.
It's just wonderful music, and you can't stop singing it. When you've heard the operetta, you just can't stop singing it.
But with Gilbert and Sullivan comes the wonderful people that we've met over many, many years, both at Grimsdyke and at Buxton Festival. And it is just so happy, such a happy time. And everybody, it's like going home to a family when we're amongst the Gilbert and Sullivan crowd, and the fun we have, it is unbelievable. So it's the highlight of my life, is Gilbert and Sullivan.
Of course some people don't like Gilbert and Sullivan, but I have a feeling that many of those who say they don't really know the operas, but because of some association have an idea that they wouldn't like them. But then many of those who love Gilbert's words don't really listen to what he's saying. But does it matter why and how people like them?
What'll have to happen is that the spirit, the edge, the joy will have to be pulled out from the middle of them. I think over the last 20 or 30 years, they've been sent up a bit. And that was maybe a way of bringing new life to them. I think now when I listen to the music, which I sometimes do, that there's a real spirit, a genuine sense of musical invention, a genuine musical and verbal wit there, which could be rediscovered more than a century on, without having to put it in quotation marks.
So, how has Opera della Luna's new take on the sorcerer fared at the International Gilbert and Sullivan Festival?
Fantastic, yeah. Amazing, really, really good. Della Luna are the best.
Excellent. 16th year, I haven't missed a year yet. It just gets better.
It's wonderful to watch the ingenuity of how they've adapted it and modernised it, and been a bit daring, to be honest, but it was fantastic.
At the beginning of her career, Valerie Masterson sang what must be the definitive Aline in the D'Oyly Carte recording of The Sorcerer.
And I don't seem to have the strength to get it through to young singers how important it is to sing Gilbert and Sullivan, for goodness sake. Because I was nowhere near ready to take on big operatic roles when I first started singing. I think if I hadn't gone into Gilbert and Sullivan, I doubt that I would have made any headway. You need to find your stage presence. How you feel comfortable expressing an emotion, and how does your voice stand up to, in those days, I used to do 6.5 performances a week, travelling around the country as well. Could I put a little bit more pressure on and get it a bit stronger? And so please, let's find a way to get more young singers singing it.
I think he's one of those people who is socially slightly uncomfortable, but when he's performing, when he's doing his act, he suddenly becomes polished and confident. He's absolutely certain of what he's talking about. And so if you can try it again, but absolutely with the courage of his convictions, with real confidence.
I can teach you with a quip if I've a mind. I can trick you into learning with a laugh. Oh, winnow all my folly, 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 and you'll find a grain or two of truth among the chaff. Oh, winnow all my folly, 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 and you'll find a grain or two of truth among the chaff.
continue performing Gilbert and Sullivan forever.
I don't think Gilbert and Sullivan will ever reach a sell-by date. It's pretty timeless.
For he who'd make his fellow creatures wise should always gild the philosophic pill. For he who'd make his fellow creatures wise should always gild the philosophic pill.
G.K. Chesterton praised Gilbert as a humorist, but questioned his success as a satirist because he said, while the English enjoy a joke, they absolutely fail to see that the joke's on them. Well, that's all the more hilarious for those of us who can see it. But it seems that the secret of Gilbert and Sullivan's success is that they can make us laugh and cry, whether we see the satire or not. Most satire is unmistakable because it's driven by anger. The affection, wit, and ambiguity with which Gilbert and Sullivan satirize transform it into something greater that will live much longer.
It's so clever, and it's better than it needs to be.
There's a little group of isles beyond the wave, so tiny you might almost wonder where it is. That nation is the bravest of the brave, and cowards are the rarest of all rarities. The proudest nations kneel at her command. She terrifies all foreign monarchs' galleons, and holds the peace of Europe in her hand with half a score invincible battalions.
Such a beast is the tale which is born on the gale from the island which dwells in the sea. Let us hope for her sake that she makes no mistake, that she's all she professes to be. Such a beast is the tale which is born.
Do you think we'll ever work again?
No, probably not.